Hello, I'm Stephen Carroll. Welcome to your Essential Business Briefing. Coming up, why hasn't France won more Brexit business from London? We take the temperature of Paris's financial industry. As Greece's creditors warn its new Prime Minister not to step out of line, what are his chances of reviving the country's economy? Plus, a new shade for summer as French producers revive the ancient tradition of orange wine. First up, though, it's one of the many consequences of Brexit, a race by European cities to win what was thought to be tens of thousands of jobs that would leave London. But 3 years later, the numbers estimated to move are much lower, and fewer still have actually relocated. Many companies are, of course, still waiting to see what form Brexit will take. We've been speaking to the chairman of Société Générale, who says that finding a good deal is the most important issue facing Europe today.
If there was one measure to reduce uncertainty, I think having a good Brexit deal would be the best way for Europe to reassure investors, to reassure consumers, savers, that we can manage without major disruption, without panic, and would be a great message for the rest of the world also that Europe is still an important player in the global economy.
Now, Paris is one of the cities vying to be Europe's new financial centre post-Brexit, and I'm joined to discuss that further by Arnaud de Bresson, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Paris Europlace, which is the organisation that promotes Paris as a financial centre. Thank you for coming to speak to us.
Thank you for your invitation.
Now, 3 years ago, we were full of optimism that there would be huge movement of companies and jobs from out of London as a result of Brexit, but we haven't really seen that materialise. Tell us about what's happened in Paris.
May I first remind you that we were not in favour of the Brexit, because we think that the Brexit is not a good news, neither for UK or for Europe, and because we are European convinced. But now that the British people have taken their decision, it's true that with the very big uncertainty around what will happen, and even more now, in the coming months, big international banks and investors in London have announced projects to relocate, rebalance part of their activities to the continental Europe. And Paris is today in a leading position to welcome these new activities.
But it is a smaller move than we had originally expected. It seems that the numbers are closer to the hundreds than the thousands or tens of thousands that are going to move.
True, a little bit smaller, but more than 100,000 of people. For us, we have noted around 5,000 announcements of employments, direct employments relocated in Paris, both by international investment banks like HSBC, 1,000 people, Bank of America, which has already implemented 250 people and has announced 400 traders back in Paris, but also JP Morgan, Standard Chartered, even Barclays, which are relocating part of their investment banking activities. And same in the fund management, in the asset management industry with BlackRock, with Schroeder, which is opening a broker-dealer in Paris. So we estimate now at about 5,000 new jobs created in Paris due to the Brexit.
But those are promises. How many do we know that have actually moved so far, or those jobs have actually been created?
We estimate at roughly one-third, which has already been implemented. That leaves two-thirds coming.
And you're confident that that will come? You don't think there's something that could change that later?
We see, and our discussion with all these financial enterprises show that because of the persistence of the uncertainty, projects could be accelerated, and even more in the perspective of the hard Brexit. If Mr. Boris Johnson is nominated as Prime Minister, the perspective of a hard Brexit could even more accelerate these moves and create new announcements for more activities being relocated.
Is that what you're hearing from players in the financial industry?
That's what we hear, and because all these players consider that they have to really to conserve, to maintain a narrow link with the European markets, and they are here for this reason. Even Jimmy Dimon, head of JP Morgan, was saying that the question is not to go back to the States for US banks in Europe. The question is to preserve their European clients and continue to work with Europe, which is a quite important market in the world.
Now, of course, Paris wasn't the only competitor in this. We know that other European cities are also getting big job movements. Are you happy with how Paris has performed in terms of attracting investment?
I quote once again Jimmy Dimon. I asked him the question, why are you choosing Paris to relocate your activities? Legal entity in Frankfurt, but activities in Paris. And his answer was because Paris has the clients, the corporates, the big French and international corporates here, which are very active market players. Paris has the talents, the skills. The French are very good in the financial industry. And third, the quality of the infrastructure.
Do you feel that Paris and France needs to do more on the regulation front to be able to be the next biggest financial centre in Europe? Are there steps you want the government to take?
With this conference, which has gathered this year more than 2,000 people, even more than last year, very international, more than 50 countries participating, we see that Paris has a new dynamic. We have a new dynamic since the election of Emmanuel Macron, thanks first to the reforms which have been made since the election of Emmanuel Macron in terms of labor rules, in terms of fiscal conditions and regulation, which were exactly the reforms that the international investors wanted to have from France. They have been implemented among the 20 measures which were announced by the president after his election. All of these measures have been implemented. Second,
if there was one big step that you wanted the government to take now, what would it be?
Next step is more about long-term savings and orientate savings towards equity markets. That's the next step that we want to discuss.
The tax incentives, for example, to allow people to save more easily.
We have
in the stock
now,
market.
with the repatriates regime, one of the most competitive regime in Europe. So the taxes are quite in a good shape. We still have some work to do on the question of the social charges. But the main issue is more now about developing the market, develop long-term savings, orientate the savings towards the equity markets, which can be a good opportunity for international players.
OK, Arnaud de Bresson from Paris Europlace, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Now moving on, Greece's new Prime Minister has promised to create jobs and boost investment into the country's beleaguered economy. Kyriakos Mitsotakis says he was cancelling Parliament's summer recess to start working on implementing key policies, including tax cuts. Even though Greece exited its bailout last year, it still has to fulfil certain conditions laid down by its creditors. So a tricky balancing act for the new Prime Minister. Delano de Souza has been looking at some of his challenges ahead. Delano.
Indeed, Stephen. Well, first let's take a look at what kind of economy Mr. Mitsotakis is inheriting. After shrinking by more than a quarter during the crisis, the country's economy grew by 1.9% last year. That's expected to reach 2% in 2019. Unemployment remains stubbornly high at over 18%. The Prime Minister's predecessor inherited a much bleaker picture. Under the bailout terms, Alexis Tsipras had to meet strict budget targets and implement painful cuts to social spending. Under his watch, Greece completed its third bailout and pulled itself back from the brink of Brexit. But despite all the tough changes, the environment for businesses actually got worse. Greece slipped to 72nd in the World Bank's ranking for ease of doing business, the second lowest in the European Union. The incoming Harvard and Stanford-educated Prime Minister, who was also a McKinsey consultant, wants to change all that. Mitsotakis wants to double growth to 4% by next year. He plans to do that by slashing taxes, cutting red tape, and boosting foreign investment. The Prime Minister also wants to increase the number of entrepreneurs starting businesses. But all that may be easier said than done. Any bold reforms could spark a backlash from unions. Emigration is also a huge concern. Official statistics show that between 2010 and 2017, 500,000 Greeks left the country. Reversing the brain drain will be a challenge. Mr. Mitsotakis says cutting taxes is his top priority, but he'll still have to meet the budget surplus target of 3.5% to keep his creditors content. Stephen?
Delano, thank you very much for that. Well, now, red, white and rosé are the three familiar standards of France's massive wine industry. But now there's a new player on the scene, or back on the scene, as a group of smaller winemakers are reviving the production of orange wine. Claire Muffson reports.
Could orange be the new rosé? Long abandoned, orange wine production is on the rise again in parts of France and Italy, and it's popping up in local cellars and on restaurant wine lists.
Today, people are looking for something new. They want novelty. They want to relax. That's part of it.
Orange wine is a bit of a misnomer. It's made from grapes, just like red, white, and rosé. Here in the Languedoc region of France, Émeric and Jordan Amiel started making organic orange wine 6 years ago. They farm their 15 hectares according to biodynamic methods.
This year is particularly good. The grapes are very clean. That's always important, even for white wines, but it's particularly important for orange wine because we keep the skin.
The process starts with white wine grapes, fermented with the skins and sometimes the seeds too. It's an old technique. Orange wine is thought to have been produced in Georgia as early as 4000 BC. Now, it's mostly small, natural wine producers who are reviving the practice.
Will you give me a taste?
With the aroma and acidity of white wine and the texture of red wine, it's not just a novelty item for this sommelier. She thinks orange wine is here to stay.
I think they're liked because they pair well with more complex flavors, while at the same time they have the freshness and acidity of a white, so you can have fun with the pairings.
But for now, production is still limited to several thousand bottles, just a drop of the roughly 4 billion litres of wine made in France each year.
Well, that's it from us for this week, but you can always find the best of our business coverage on our Facebook page, France 24 Business, and you can tweet me with your comments at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.